your perspective, does that make sense? Is that stuff happening in the marketplace? Because I'm not in the consulting space, but I sure hope it is.
I got to stop here for a second. The people who are watching this podcast that know us, you make a good point. You'd be like, these two, this must be a podcast because neither one of them has started yelling at the other one yet. And the other one hasn't had a great counterpoint yet either. So we'll stop playing nice at some point and start arguing.
Hi, my name's Chris Wilson. I'm the president of Healthcare Highways. Today is episode 1 of a new podcast series we're launching called the Disruptors Club. I hope to establish a dialogue with unique and informative guests that are challenging the status quo or looking at healthcare differently. And for my first guest, I really had to dig deep into who would I pick to launch this series. And it wasn't very hard for me to pick the first person that I worked underneath when I joined Healthcare Highways. He was my first boss at Healthcare Highways. He really had a lot of influence on developing my ability to understand networks, how to sell networks, and how to think about the cost paradigm a little bit differently. And so I want to introduce him today, but I hope you find this series very engaging. And I want us to be speaking to the employers, the healthcare providers, the health systems, and everybody in the ecosystem that affects the healthcare spend and has the ability to change healthcare. And that's why we've labeled it the Disruptors Club. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Marc Pinney with Holmes Murphy. Marc, welcome.
Thanks, Chris.
Glad to have you as my first guest.
Quite the introduction.
It's kind of intimidating to have you sitting here with me as you brought me onto the vendor side after so many years on the consulting side. But before we get into that, Marc, tell us your role, what you do, a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Hey, Marc Pinney with Holmes Murphy and Associates, a vice president and shareholder, work on the employee benefits side.
Tell me about your family. You married, have kids?
Yeah. Married 25 years to my wife, Amy, my lovely wife, Amy. 3 kids. Got one that'll be graduating from Oklahoma State this year. Got a daughter at Boston College and about to send a senior somewhere, just not sure where.
And I guess your daughter, I know a little bit more about you than the audience does, but your daughter's pretty accomplished. Tell us about your daughter and some of the things she's accomplished in her young career.
Yeah, thank you. She's a music theater major at Boston Conservatory, and the short version is after not thinking that was going to be what she was going to do in college, kind of late in her high school career, landed a couple of starring roles in some first-time musicals, and that got her on the path to Boston Conservatory. So she loves it, and hopefully the next stop's Broadway.
So obviously she takes after her mother.
100%. I don't have to sing for this, I'm assuming, because I could end your podcast series today.
So one of the things I'm really excited about is to have some good dialogue and banter, and there's no better way to do that than to start off with, we have a common thread that links us together, and one of us was able to go to their university of choice, and the other one had to take their second option. Do you want to speak to that a little bit? Yeah,
I'm sure you were still happy with your second choice, but referring, of course, to I'm an Aggie and Chris is a Longhorn. So he and I'm a couple years older than Chris, so they're at different times. But yes, this is an ongoing discussion, as you can imagine.
And I would say that growing up, you had a lot more wins when we were in high school than I did.
Yeah,
but I think we've reversed.
That might have flipped itself over the course of time.
We might have.
Yeah.
But it is proof to the audience that we can coexist and we can be friends. And so I wanted to get that out of the way. Yeah. Marc, I wanted to start the conversation around healthcare and really disruption around what do you see as your core function and your core responsibility as a benefits consultant or VP of benefits for Holmes Murphy?
Yeah, it is connecting employers to that healthcare ecosystem that you were talking about. And that's all aspects of it. It's ensuring their employees have the healthcare they want to give. I was going to say the best possible healthcare, but that's not always the goal. You have to meet the employer where they are, both from a cultural perspective and from a financial perspective. But making sure that we're identifying and implementing solutions that put their benefits and their culture front and center to do what they need to do for their employees and what they want to do for their employees in that space.
So when I joined Healthcare Highways, I had a 20-year consulting background. I owned my own firm. I sold it to a large national firm. And I found that each firm kind of has their own DNA, and they look at healthcare in a certain lens. Let's switch back over to the vendor side. When you were at Healthcare Highways, What did you see was your primary responsibility, and how did you look at healthcare differently than you look at it today at Holmes Murphy?
I'll quickly, my background comes from the TPA and PPO sides of the business.
Explain that. What did you do before?
Yeah,
before
I started out as an engineer doing very simple engineering, and I was such a good engineer, I found myself as a TPA salesman for Gallagher Benefit Administrators. From there, worked Texas True Choice, a PPO in this market, and then spent some time coming over to the consultant side with Holmes Murphy. I was approached by CEO of Healthcare Highways, Michael Wilson, to ask if I'd help him build a health plan. It was just too good of an opportunity not to do.
So you were actually on the vendor benefit side before you got on the consulting side.
It was 3 years with Holmes Murphy, loved it, but the opportunity to go build a better mousetrap with Healthcare Highways was too enticing. So stepped away, as you well know, in 2013. You were the first person we hired immediately, as quickly as I could, to see if I could validate that Michael had made the right decision hiring me. And then we went to work building a health plan and building a better health plan. And what's interesting about it is we started by building networks, as you well know, but not everybody who's listening does. And then it was if you build a network, how do you plug the network in to the administrative piece of it? And it didn't always work well. So we start thinking about that. What about the care coordination piece of it? So you start building the care coordination piece. So next thing you know, you're care coordinating, you've already contracted a first-class network. And then it's like, what about the PBM claims? The RX claims are starting to be a problem. What do? You build a PBM. And then eventually you kind of built all of those pieces, and that's what Healthcare Highways became, because every time we would build a really great segment of the solution, it still didn't always bolt on correctly.
Right.
And to be fair, you're 20 years consulting, and I'm 7 now. Some of that lies at the feet and the responsibility of the consultants and brokers, because they may not know how to do it.
Right.
They may have concerns about putting something together that's just not the most commonplace. Like, nobody gets fired for hiring IBM, right?
Right.
Same is true in our space. So there's a lot of that mentality out there. So we went through those struggles at Healthcare Highways, and then eventually it found its footing. But at that point, I was ready to step back over to the employer side and take everything that I had learned through all of that process and that we learned together and say, let's get directly back on the employer side of this and help plug them into the solutions that the marketplace was creating. Because Healthcare Highways was a solution. There's literally 1 million point solutions in healthcare and health tech right now.
So you just said a lot, and we're going to unpack that for this audience, because I think there's a lot of good nuggets to dig into on that one. Let's dig on the first one.
Sure.
I don't want you to talk to me as a Holmes Murphy representative or a Healthcare Highways representative. I want you to talk to me from a global benefits consultant perspective. When you were at Healthcare Highways, you called on all the consultants in the marketplace, right? So you have exposure to all of them, and you also work with Holmes Murphy. So you said that nobody gets fired for hiring Blue Cross or IBM is your example, but those models are integrated models. So explain to me that you said some of them don't understand the system. What did you mean by that? Do you mean by they don't understand insurance, or they don't understand products outside of the products that exist? Explain that to the audience a little bit more.
I think it's probably as much as anything. I think your typical broker or consultant, they understand all the pieces. I think it's the integration that can be the nervous point and the tripping point, to be honest with you, in delivery. So you can have great individual solutions, but if they don't go together in a seamless fashion, then the whole experience can either be clunky or just not better than what you walked away from. So I think most folks can evaluate individual solutions and say, I see merit in that, but how do you put that into the overall solution for the employees and have it be a better overall outcome? I think there's a real hesitance to want to try to do that.
Well, let's just stop there. Like, when you say that, what I think you're saying is, when you buy United Healthcare, Blue Cross, Cigna, and oftentimes you just buy everything.
Yeah,
right. It's one package.
Very frequently, you buy the entire suite.
And people don't understand all the components underneath that chassis, right? And it's intimidating. Or I'm going to suggest the consultant teams have such big books of business that are reliant upon that integrated model that they haven't been trained, developed to unpack that. Or is it that they don't have the capacity to even start?
Yeah, you're not wrong on any of it. And I think in any given situation, one of those would move to the top as to the most likely reason, but every single one of those is part of that. You have to have the tools as a consultant to say, I can evaluate it and say, this thing looks like it does this well, but how's it going to perform inside of this? What's my expectation? And you can start getting into conversations about ROI and performance guarantees and things like that. You didn't make your job any easier as a broker or consultant by finding yourself in those conversations. So, I'm opening that can of worms too a little bit to say it's not difficult to put in a fully baked all-in-one solution. In fact, it's easier. It definitely is easier. And that's true whether you're fully insured or self-funded, frankly.
Right.
I'm sorry, we'll get into those things too, but it's like the fact that even if there is an understanding of all the components, let's be honest, there can be complacency, and complacency sometimes directs towards the easiest solution, even if it's not necessarily the best solution.
Well, I'd even give you the benefit of the doubt that let's not even say it's complacency. Let's just say it's, is it scalable? So if you've built a brokerage firm that relies on an integrated model to support that model, and you charge X dollars to support your customer, and you know the workload that you have to do on a integrated model.
Yep.
And then you go, if I unbundle this and go buy my TPA, my network, my PBM, my care coordination, my stop loss, all independently, you've just increased my workload, fivefold. Then I have to manage all those vendors and track it. Now, that may be in the best interest of the customer, but the consultants, in my opinion, struggle with, I'm not getting paid that level, or we don't have the staff to support every one of our clients being on this model. So one of the challenges that I want to really address is, do we have the right alignment in how we are compensating our consultants, or are we really, should consultants be tasked with buying insurance? Should employers step up to the plate to buy insurance? What's the right way to fix the alignment of the ecosystem without pointing fingers at someone's doing it for the wrong reasons? We'll get into that later.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the structure right now.
Yeah. One of the things that is at least a building block in getting a better truth is the transparency requirements that are out there. That was actually one of the good things that came out of the CAA. The Consolidated Appropriations Act. And that requirement for transparency has at least pushed that conversation a lot more front and center. Now, not every broker or consultant is disclosing in the same way.
Sure.
But at least it's a step to say, here's the percentage. The better disclosures say, here's a line of coverage, whether it's the TPA or the pharmacy or the clinical or whatever it may be. Here's how much you're paying your broker or consultant.
Right.
Okay. That helps that conversation a lot.
Sure.
And frankly, it probably created some scrambles at some brokers and consultants where they were not anxious to have that conversation.
Right.
But that's what it was designed to do. By having that, it at least allows and encourages the conversation between an employer and a consultant to say, what do you do for your money? What do you do for me here? And if that value can't be justified by the work that's being done, then maybe that number adjusts. I think to your point about it is more difficult and it requires more resources to do a good job when you start doing that unbundling. I think it allows the more forthright consultants and brokers to have this conversation with the client to say, hey, you were paying me X when we were doing this. We're taking you to a more complex model that'll include the following resources. It's fair that it's X plus some amount to help us cover and ensure that we're still delivering at a reasonable profitability for the brokerage or consultant.
Well, the reason I like the discussion is I think it changes the alignment where, I used to, as I'm a big pick on the consultant kind of guy because I always laugh that I'm
because
a recovering consultant,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I was part of the ecosystem, but I'm in the enlightenment period right now, right? And what I'm really wanting to do is not take money away from anybody, but I want to change the alignment. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like what we're asking consultants to do versus what could affect real change are not necessarily aligned. Let me put it this way. Mm-hmm. Right now, consultants often bid for a scope of services that says we're going to manage your health plan, we're going to service your account, and we're going to get paid X.
Yep.
But what if there's an environment, because we talk a lot about, we want to have our providers, and we'll talk about this in a minute, aligned with value. Why don't we have our consultants aligned with value, and value measured as execute what I want you to do, drive savings, and then get rewarded for that. And then you have a performance-based culture, not a transactional. And I believe a lot of consultants would love to have that type of arrangements because they then would have to have the infrastructure to support that, but they have a carrot to go out there and achieve it to earn a return and make a margin.
Here's an irony, and you didn't say this exactly, but you alluded to it a little bit. The question is, what is the consultant's role? And I'm going to use consultant and broker interchangeably, because sometimes consultants or brokers get offended if you don't call them one or the other. But what is their role in it? And the irony that I think for many of the solutions in healthcare that aren't the traditional carriers, you're better served by having somebody in there that knows it and can spend all their time doing it, and they had better know it better than the employer does, or they're not bringing any value. Those solutions require, or are certainly benefited by having experts in the space, consultants and brokers. The irony is sometimes the broker and consultant is the one who's the biggest catalyst to those new solutions, because they're either stuck or, for whatever reason, dedicated to a traditional model. So in some ways, if I'm and again, I've sat on your side just like you've sat on mine, in some ways, the broker consultant becomes an impediment to getting my solution in front of the employer, right? In other ways, you probably have a better chance of success by having them in there, because if you just try to get the employer and the solution to go together, you've got less expertise and resources trying to make all those pieces fit. So I think that's kind of part of where I think you and I are going to play around in the conversation today is, what's the right mix of having that advisor doing the job that the employer really wants the advisor to do, and having it work in such a way that the best solutions find their way to the front of the conversation.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would say this, that one of the things that you and I have really done a good job of, if you don't know, Mark and I, we've oftentimes had these brainstorming sessions that are epic, where we challenge one another when we were at Healthcare Highways, and it was silence in the room except for us two, but we always came out aligned as friends, as partners, as alignment. But here's one of the things we learned. We always in healthcare lots of times talk about what's the right way. Well, sometimes it's not one way, right? And what one customer wants or one client wants isn't what the other one wants. So I'm not suggesting it's a one-size-fits-all model. You take a fully insured, a small employer, they may want to buy the integrated plan, and they may just want you to service that account, right? And that's all they need. You move up the scale and employer size, you get into different types of employer sophistication. But then they're not all the same just because they have the same number of employees. Maybe they have a staff of 3 at 1,000 life group. Maybe they have a staff of 20, right? And so I think this model seems to be very rigid, lacks flexibility and creativity to align with where the employer is in their buying decision and their buying capabilities. And to your point, I completely agree, is if they're consulting you and they're reaching out for services, they are looking for something that they can't do themselves, but they should be able to define at the employer level what those things are, and you can help them get to those things and analyze those things and then measure how you bring value back to them. But ultimately, in my opinion, the consumer, which is the employer in employer healthcare, we ought to be equipping them to make better buying decisions. We ought to be teaching them to buy, not necessarily lessening their impact on the consultant, but maybe changing the relationship where you guys sit next to each other and really partner in these solutions, right? So talk to me about your perspective. Does that make sense? Is that stuff happening in the marketplace? Because I'm not in the consulting space, but I sure hope it is.
So you said something that makes me, I got to stop here for a second. The people who are watching this podcast that know us, you make a good point. You'd be like, these two, this must be a podcast, because neither one of them has started yelling at the other one yet. And the other one hasn't had a great counterpoint yet either. So we'll stop playing nice at some point and start arguing. Sure. But so people won't have to wait the entire podcast for that. From an employer perspective, I think we have to be fair to the employers that they don't know what they don't know. When I say there's literally a million solutions. That's not hyperbole. It's like ShortLister is
and
a
they all
service,
save 20%.
and they all save 20%. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So trying to get through those, it literally is a full-time job for firms like Holmes Murphy for us to continue to evaluate those solutions, understand those solutions, differentiate them to the ones that already exist in the marketplace, look at that ROI, determine if we could calculate that ROI, monitor that ROI, and figure out how it's going to fit in. We have 1,400 people in our firm, and many of us spend big chunks of many days doing nothing but that. That is not fair for an employer. Even if you're on an HR, even if you're the benefits director for an employer, to think that that's how they can spend their time doing it. So in that sense, I do think the alignment is correct to have somebody who can dedicate their time for it. Is this the best model, the broker consultant model we have? I don't know. Bigger firms could hire somebody to do that. Really big firms, a lot of times they will hire somebody who has consulting experience to be in that role. But even in that situation, it is not possible for the number of resources that a company can and should commit to that to stay up with it. We can't forget that employers, they didn't ask for this. They didn't ask to be little insurance companies, but they have it right now. And I think the discussion has to go at some point to say, how much longer can we ask our employers to be the backbone of this healthcare system? Because they're fitting the tab for pretty much everybody right now.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I think, healthcare's moved to really a recruiting tool. Mm-hmm. Really, how do we compete in the marketplace? How do we lower our costs? But, I think it was Ford that said, or IBM that said, we run a healthcare company. We just happen to produce machines or automobiles. But until you understand that this is a top 3 line item and you got to be managing it that way, there's a whole nother discussion. I think we've kind of explored really surface level of just challenging, is there a better way? Are there other ways to do that? But I want to take the conversation to like a pivot to the right a little bit on what you just said. One of the things that I didn't have an appreciation for, and you and I used to both get mad at consultants of wanting to get your product in front of them, and then you tell them, and then it's like they didn't even remember what I said a month ago. But what you enlightened me when you went back to Holmes Murphy is you called me and said, Chris, we've got 50 vendors in here every week. They're all saying the same thing. They're telling us 20%. We can't analyze this and digest this and tell the difference, right? How do we fix that? And there's been a lot of new interest in healthcare that have come in with new tech ideas and new ideas, and a lot of them fly to, here today, gone tomorrow. They don't make it. And it's because of what you just described. How do you get into an ecosystem that's owned by the carriers?
I was actually thinking about that exact point as I was driving down here for this conversation. Think about the companies that have Amazon, Google. We're not talking about the startup in the garage tech company. These are massive tech companies that can see that 18% of the GDP is going to healthcare, and they're like, we ought to be in that business. And they're smashing into the wall, and they can't figure it out right out of the gate either. Locally, Mark Cuban is putting a lot of time and effort into it. He's like, we got a lot of smart people that are trying to solve this, and they get their first look into it, or their second look, or even deeply into it, and they have some of the same challenges. So I think we have to accept that the flaws in healthcare and the waste in healthcare is so systemic that if it could be solved easily, it would have been solved. And that's not a reason not to try to solve it. It's a reason to try and solve it. But I think that's just a demonstration of just how deeply flawed the healthcare delivery system is, the employer system that we have today.
So again, I'm going to drill down on you. How do you solve vendor entrance into the space when you've got to be consulting on your clients? How do you see 50 vendors? Do you have a team dedicated? Like what does that look like, and how can we make that better? How do we create a system of new entrants and really differentiate, or are they all the same?
Yeah. Yes, we do have a team that does that. We literally make playbooks for, pick a category, cancer, musculoskeletal, whatever it may be, and that team makes playbooks, and they vet vendors, and they say, here's what it looks like for this size segment, and here's the efficacy here, and even with all of that, it's a lot to keep hold of. I don't know the answer, because you're not going to have people stopping coming in this space, and we want them. And now we've made it, how far? We made it 20 minutes before one of us said AI, but I'll be the one to break that bubble. With AI coming in, is going to be a whole nother wave of how AI impacts what we're doing. Maybe that's the magic bullet. Maybe AI can come in here and say, yes, through gathering and assessing, we can figure out who's doing it well, and we can make rankings, and we can make case studies and things like that. But we've all been trying to do that for a long time, and I don't mean to sound as though it's impossible. We just have to acknowledge the shortcomings in trying to manage that many new point solutions as they're trying to get evaluated. So there's a better mousetrap out there for doing it. I think we're all trying to work towards that, but there's some hope that says with better analytics around that, the cream will rise to the top, and it's up to the brokers and consultants in the equation to open their ears and eyes when those great solutions do emerge, that we're taking advantage of them and not just waiting until they're forced upon us and our clients, that we're actively seeking them out.
So, Mark, you probably saw hundreds of vendors last year as an organization.
Yep.
This is not a Holmes Murphy knock at all, or any consultant, but what would you guess or estimate the adoption rate of any of those was? Honestly, was it effective?
That's a really good question. Yeah, you're right. I can't speak across the block of business at this point, but the ratio of new companies to adoption is going to be a small percentage for many of them, and it's still true. It's still true that getting that vendor put into one or two clients, sometimes almost as a test case, as a beta for a client that says, I'm willing to take my chances on that because our plan needs help in this area. That's still the most effective way for brokers and consultants to go, that one worked, do it again. But if I showed you those two on pieces of paper, you wouldn't necessarily, because you didn't put another one and it didn't work effectively. They'd look the same on paper. They got that same 20% savings. They got the same ROI. They got the same performance guarantees. One of them worked and one of them didn't. And that experience is hard to replace.
Yeah.
But that's also a slow means of getting new solutions into the client base for any brokers and consultants and the marketplace, is because that takes time to evaluate.
Yeah, and I think the point is that is the obstacle that I want the audience to understand that is out there is it is a flawed system. There's a lot of competition in this space. There's a lot of private equity investment in this space. There's a lot of point solutions in this space. There's a lot of point solution fatigue. There's a lot of promises. And anytime someone like my organization's out there competing, I'm competing against all that noise. And I'm competing against that noise to you as a brokerage firm that's got all these other vendors in there. And it just really clouds the decision making.
You're also competing against panels. So
exactly.
Some firm's solution to how to do this is, and this isn't new either, in your history that even very large national firms, in fact, particularly large national firms will say, here's the 7 of these we're going to consider. Everybody else is locked out. Does that suggest that a better one doesn't show up next week? And that process can be, very difficult for a new vendor to break into. So as flawed as the overall is, it can get worse sometimes at the very large national level because of the panels are created. And back to, I guess we're going to have to get a little controversial at some point. That's not always in the employer's best interest as to why and how those panels get created.
I think that's the topic of fiduciary liability. One of the big things I'm really engaged in, we have a law firm, McAfee & Taft, that represents us and does all of our ERISA work, and they're also a customer. I think now they're a mutual customer.
They are.
But one of the things that they've taught me is for ERISA plans that employers are purchasing this on behalf of their members, and they are bearing that liability of, did you vet this appropriately for the right reasons? There's recently been a couple of lawsuits on the PBM side for fiduciary liability, large employers. Some are still being litigated. Some were dismissed or dropped. Some were settled. But the point is there alignment in that decision-making process? And I don't think that employers are fully aware that they can be sued, that plan members can sue them and hold them responsible for those decisions. Are you seeing anything in this space right now?
It's interesting. When that legislation first passed about fiduciary responsibility and the liability, the bottom line was that it always existed since ERISA, But this was the new, no, we're serious about it legislation, because it went into effect pretty quickly for the 401k space. And from a fiduciary responsibility perspective, they have boards, they have meetings, they tighten it up on that side.
Right.
Wild, wild west on the employee benefit side. So now I was like, no, you guys are going to do it more like the 401k. So when that came out, some of our most strategic thinkers in our organization at Holmes Murphy, they were like, this is a big deal. And I remember I was actually speaking at a conference with Brandon, and we were putting together our slide deck. And for this is a big deal fiduciary responsibility, I literally made the animation with like curtains pulling back, like ta-da. If I'd have had volume, I'd have made the champagne noise, I guess. And he's like, what's the big deal here? I was like, do you see what this says? He's like, what it says and what's going to happen in the marketplace are two different things. So what appeared like the aha moment,
right,
and it may eventually get there, I thought it was a huge deal, and he said it's going to take time on this side, because we are still having employers and their consultants and their advisors not acting with the same level of fiduciary responsibility that the 401k folks are holding themselves to.
Yeah, and I think some of it's just it's overwhelming. Do they have the right team? Do they have the confidence to make the decision? It's very intimidating, which is why I'm a big believer in decisions for benefits ought to involve your C-suite. These are business decisions.
Oh, for sure.
You need human resource support for the employee representation, but you need CFO and CEO. You need vision. You need direction. It's a big line item, but you need that support. You need that cover from your benefits department when they make a decision that they have C-suite support to execute, right? And so I'm real big on educating employers on how to buy insurance. As you know, one of the things I do think is I love the consultant reimagined. I love the consultant not being intimidated by having a vendor talk to, quote unquote, their client. They're the vendor's client too, guys. And so these conversations, you want to upset a consultant, you have a conversation without them. And in my opinion, if they're doing a great job, they should not be intimidated by that conversation whatsoever. How does that make you feel when a vendor talks to your customer?
It's funny you say this, because I'm gonna say both sides of this. As an advisor, you feel this responsibility to make sure that you're in all these conversations. But I will say, once someone is a client of ours and we've identified vendors, we want the vendor and the employer to have that conversation. I would hope so. I'm amazed at how many times we take over a new client and that client has no idea like who the representative of their vendors are, or they've never had that vendor in front of them to discuss their results, to make suggestions of solutions and things like that. So I'm sitting here telling you how difficult it is for an advisor, for a consultant or broker to keep up with everything. And yet there's a segment of our business, of our industry side of the industry, that then don't put the experts, being the people who are delivering the product solution, into the room with the employer to help explain it, to validate the results. You put them in, make them be accountable. Just like we have to be accountable, so should the vendors. And I'm amazed at how often with a new client, we realize that the vendors have not been a part of the validation of the solution and the next steps.
I agree, and I would say that if you're working the system correctly, it doesn't matter who's in the room. It matters, did it get communicated downstream to everybody that's involved, right? Was there a clear message? Was there a clear objective? Whether you were there or not, if you're being brought into the conversation, that shows you're important, you're valued, you weren't available, or that just happened organically. But this defensive posture and this real nervousness around these conversations that are taking place, these insecurities, our best arrangements where we've had customers for 10 years, we have regular interaction with the customer.
And
they know who to call.
To chime in there, we frequently get the vendor's best effort on that 100%. Too. Because this is a valued client where they're involved in the conversation.
And you can't be everywhere.
Get more out of your vendors in that situation 100%. By giving them a stake, an audience, and a voice in that room.
But where it breaks down is when you're not communicating back to each other. And that happens a lot.
It is. But I'll go back to your point. Is there a potential for defensiveness as a broker or consultant if you don't feel like you're having that control? It certainly exists as an
I would
element.
argue it's more self-reflection, and maybe I am not doing my job.
That's exactly right. If you're in the room with your client and you've got a vendor saying things and you're not confident that you're doing your job correctly, that's a scary moment, right? Vendor says something, client turns to you and says, is that what you understood? Or can we validate that with what we've seen? And you got a deer in the headlights look. It's not a good look.
And that's where I want to spend some time on that. But see, here's what I say. I actually think it's the exact opposite. If the consultant brought the vendor in the room and that vendor actually knew something more than the consultant doesn't have to know everything about everything. They should say, that's why I brought them in front of you. That's why they're here. They're a subject matter expert on this. They're the best in the business. That should validate the consultant, not make them intimidated.
It absolutely should. That's exactly right.
But oftentimes it upsets them, and that's what frustrates me.
There's no doubt about it. And it's not to the employer's benefit in that situation.
Right. So the conversation is, aligning with the value. I always love when we all sit in the room together. Mm-hmm. We're all aligned for a common objective. But as a consultant, I was on that side. You're always looking over your shoulder for that. Who's that person trying to unseat me? You only win business in my space and in your space if you replace somebody else, right? So there's this paranoia. Right. There's this paranoia that exists. But relationships that exist, and you should always know where you stand in your relationship with your customer, whether it be a vendor, consultant, any part of the ecosystem. And so it shouldn't be a surprise. Healthcare Highways operates on a performance-based culture. If our employees come up to review and the first time they know they're not performing is at review, then we're not doing our job. And I just think that's the way healthcare ought to be working. We ought to be tracking. If you're having a quarterly meeting, talk to your vendors, invite your point solutions, have your consultant be there leading those meetings, but have honest conversations, and they don't have to be derogatory, but they need to be constructive. And we need to track progress, and we need to get to a common goal. One of the things I want to shift to, Mark, is insurance is really transactional, and it's kind of built around this renewal cycle. Mm-hmm. And I just think that's wrong. That's where we measure what the cost and the inflation and all these other things are. But shouldn't we be looking at healthcare as what is our 3-year plan? And it's a rolling 3-year plan. And if people aren't executing, they can be replaced anywhere in that 3-year plan, but it doesn't mean the plan has to change. What's magical around a renewal cycle?
I think what's magical is it forces everybody into the conversation. Frequently, that's when you do get your C-suite involved, because that CFO has to look at the new price tag and say, "You've got to be kidding me." I said last year, the year before, that we can't continue to absorb these kind of increases. So what makes that magical is all eyes go to it. So I don't think that's exactly what you were asking, but look, you're right. To be effective in a health plan, this can't be an annual conversation. If it's an annual conversation, you and I both know what it is. It is they got the renewal. The broker tried to negotiate it to the best of their ability. It came out at 18. They got it knocked down to 6. They gave it to their client, said, "Look, I saved you 12%. And the client's like, "Ooh, thank goodness." HR is pleased that at least it wasn't 18%. And the CFO shakes his head but signs off on it, right? That's the traditional cycle. So if you're having conversations once a year about your health plan, that's probably the model that you're in right now. Of course, I wouldn't say that if I didn't believe that it should be a year-round, multi-year process and strategy and plan. To your point, you can pivot, but yes, for clients to not have a multi-year strategy, they're doing themselves a disservice, and their advisors are doing them a disservice.
Well, you're a leader in your organization. Do you look at your budget once a year?
I think you know the answer to that.
Right. I mean, I just feel like we ought to be managing the healthcare budget just like we manage our internal budgets, and no less than a review every 90 days, tracking it monthly, having people be responsible. I think some of the larger companies do a good job of that.
For sure. Part of that's accessibility to information, because Texas is better than most. If we're talking, if there's Texas employers in this conversation, because of the House Bill 2015, there at least is a requirement that they get that information twice a year. Isn't that comical, though? It's like that was a huge step to get that information twice a year of what's probably your second largest line item expense that you get to check in and see how it's doing if you're in a fully insured environment. So, yes, certainly the larger employers, self-funded employers, where they can and should be getting that information on a monthly basis. But in the fully insured environment, there's challenges to that for sure.
So let's shift gears. I've picked on the distribution side, the consultant side, the employer side. Let's talk about my side a little bit with my other audience.
Enough about me. Let's talk about you.
No, we're still going to talk about you and
okay.
me, but we're going to talk about my space and pick on my space. And so I'll give you a chance to chime in. Is we really address the unit cost part of the healthcare spend. Mm-hmm. We do contracting. We facilitate and partner and contract with provider systems, individual providers, hospital systems, individual hospitals, you name it, and point solutions inside of that ecosystem. What do you find is the biggest challenge from the consumer perspective of transparency in that contracting side?
Just
what could improve?
Most of it. I mean, there are historically the member has had zero visibility into what healthcare costs, and the employers haven't had a ton more. There's certainly been products developed and programs developed to try to increase that transparency. So I think there's progress that has been made on that. But it is the single biggest problem with healthcare in America. There's a reason it's 18% of the GDP. It's because when, as a consumer, as a user of healthcare, once you've kind of given your pound of flesh in the conversation, it's all you can eat buffet, right? You have no differentiation to know if you're buying the filet mignon or the chuck round when you're going and buying those services. How many metaphors could I shove into that one sentence? By the way, I think I really put those together. So anyway, it is that transparency is going to be a huge piece. And the other issue is, despite I'd like us to get into, at some point talking about how expensive this has gotten for the consumer on it. Yeah. But the issue is, despite the fact that it has gotten materially more expensive, so expensive that most people cannot afford their health care, they still don't have great visibility into it. And once this is the most you have to pay, they're going to buy it as though prices does not matter. It's of no concern. So we have people that are making decisions about healthcare, especially expensive healthcare, that are no longer paying that tab at all. So why would you refuse? I mean, other than it hurts to have healthcare sometime, in terms of the financial side of it, they're not paying for it. The employers are paying for it, and that's our system. But give me another example of somewhere where you don't know how much you're supposed to pay.
Right.
And once you've been told that's all you need to pay, you're allowed to have as much of this as you want, that you're not going to continue to take more. There's no other segment of our society and of our economy that works in that fashion. And that in and of itself, it is the problem with healthcare. You can't have a dissociation between the services consumed and who's paying that price tag. And I know that's where I know Healthcare High as well. That's where I know you guys are in there trying to, one, make that price tag cheaper on those things, but it's got to be something too that helps the other part of that, and that's the visibility of the consumer to say, how much you're spending, and somehow you have to align the incentives even once they're tapped out individually, so that they're still making good consumer decisions inside of purchasing and using healthcare.
Well, I'll even tag along with that concept and say, I don't know another industry where you walk into a provider's office for a service and you have no idea what your cost is. Mm-hmm. You might know what the copay is, but you don't know the cost of the service. Mm-hmm. They tell you they need to do something. They don't tell you how much it costs. They don't tell you the impact to the plan. They just, you need this, you need this, you need this. They don't provide you a catalog of cost and other options. The provider is the referral source where you get that, unless you ask, can I go somewhere besides the hospital? Oh, yeah, you can go down the street. But that wasn't their first option. Why wasn't that the first option? Because they had a contractual alignment with another provider that's probably paying them a revenue, which means they're billing higher charges to be able to do that. And so you have the referral system flawed. Now, the provider just builds, much like consultants, workflows that work for them, right? This is where I refer my cases, regardless of insurance. This is where I send my testing. This is where I do my surgeries. This is where I do this. And so I don't know another industry where the consumer does not have consumer choice. They don't have consumerism. And then oftentimes they don't really know their responsibility until it runs through a claim repricing, a claim adjudication, and they get an EOB and says, oh, we actually misquoted you. You owe $150 because that goes against your deductible on top of your $60 copay, and your out-of-pocket's X, right? And then you get a surprise bill.
Yeah.
I don't know another market where that exists.
No, and let's be fair. It's not as though we haven't been trying to solve for this problem. We're not the only two people that are talking about this. When the whole idea of high deductible health plans were centered around the idea of let's create consumerism. Right. So fundamentally, that's a good idea. The challenges that have come with that is when you look at that out-of-pocket expense, it has grown so big. So I'm sitting here saying, hey, there's not enough skin in the game by the employee. I'm about to say they don't have any left to give. And if you look at the expenses that employees have incurred on the out-of-pocket cost, it's been, actually, if you look from like 2019, let's go pre-COVID, because COVID kind of did this for a little while. Go pre-COVID to 2025. What we know from our block of business is that the employee out-of-pocket costs, not their contribution, what they pay for the actual health care, it's actually relatively flat. It's about a 10% increase over that time until 25. And in 25, it jumped up.
What was the cause?
About 15% in a single year. Well, I can tell you, because if you look at the employer contribution during that period of time, it kept going up and up and up. And finally, in 2025 was really the first year. There's a couple different data sources on this, Business Group on Health and Milliman and some things like that. The employers, I guess they're saying uncle, at least to a degree.
Well, it was an employee-friendly market. Now it's an employer-friendly market.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that contribution. So now the employer contribution, for the first time since 2019, and probably much before that, went down in the Business Group on Health survey. Also, what went down is their contribution to their health savings accounts.
Wow.
What went up is the employee contribution jumped up by 10% in a single year, and their out-of-pocket costs jumped 15%. So that's not the only source of data on this, but that's a pretty decent one to say. Employers might be to the point where they're saying, we're done. We've literally done all, uncle. We've given all we can give. The problem is it's not as though the employee hasn't increased along the way.
Right.
So their costs have gone up materially to the point that their out-of-pocket costs are north of $3,000. Half the people in the country don't have money for a $1,000 emergency.
100%.
53% of folks, according to one study, can't come up with $1,000 without going into debt to cover an emergency. Yet we just said the out-of-pocket for the year is over $3,000.
Right.
I don't know that we can use the word unsustainable enough in this conversation, and we've been using it for years.
That's your podcast, Unsustainability.
Unsustainable, yeah. Yours is the Disrupt. What is yours?
The Disruptors Club. You're on it. You should know the name.
I am.
There's our first
I'm
argument.
the original Disruptors Club.
Goodness.
Yes, thank you. But the Unsustainability Club includes almost every employer in this country, because the affordability conversation is just taken to a point where employers don't have any more money to give, employees don't. And that's where you have got to, if you want to put all that in a pie chart and say who's giving what for this,
right?
And that family of four is now up over $35,000 a year, according to Milliman, for a family of four for healthcare. $35,000.
It's unaffordable, yeah.
You have to shrink the pie, because you can't just keep changing the pie pieces, because everybody is saying, I can't make my pie piece bigger. Not the contribution, not the out-of-pocket, not the dollars into the HSAs. So you have got to shrink the pie. So let's pull this around to where our conversation started.
Yeah.
If you're an employer, and therefore if you're an advisor to an employer in a broker consultant role, and you aren't bringing in things to shrink the pie,
right?
Disservice doesn't begin to describe where we're at this. It's bordering on malpractice. Okay, to not go in there and do something to shrink the pie. I'm gonna keep going here for a second, because there's another piece of this that is just kind of terrifying. In a conversation within the last week with one of the major carriers, the specific conversation and quote was 9% increase is the new flat. 9% is what you're
That's not trend, that's flat.
That's their version of flat these days. Because weirdly, in all of this, and this is not a culpability conversation. This is how broken it is. Their books are upside down too. They're trying to run at an 85% loss ratio, and they're running low 90s, generally speaking. So the reason 9% is the new flat, because they've got to get their loss ratios back in line. So this isn't to suggest that any one part of this is any one group and organization in this is the culpable one. It's no matter how you look at it, everybody is saying our finances are out of whack on this. It's because the whole pie is too big at this point. We've got to shrink the overall cost of healthcare for an employee and their families.
Well, that's insightful to me. I didn't know a lot of that information. Thank you for sharing. But I would also argue that insurance companies stop being insurance companies. One of them or two of them are PBMs, really owned by PBMs.
Yeah.
But I don't think people, and I spoke on this last week in Houston, and we're speaking again on Friday to employers and HR executives. People underestimated the impact of the subsidies being withdrawn to the insurance companies, not the qualified subsidies to the individuals, but the payments to the silver-based plans on silver loading, the exchange, it's going to affect enrollment into those plans. And the insurance companies were making a lot of money. So there is a downstream effect on insured plans that is going to affect these cost increases that goes up into contracting on their network contracts for employer-based plans, whether you're fully insured or self-funded, and it's coming. And they've gotten themselves a little bit behind the 8 ball. The insurance companies that are PBMs, government is attacking and legislating against these rebates or these misaligned reimbursements to consultants or other firms. And so they are going to have a reshaping of their revenue on that side. And so you're starting to see the first signs of people unloading or uncoupling their PBMs or their alignment around, Optum's a good example. They grew to one of the largest, if not the largest, employer of physicians, and now they're like, we have too many physicians. We're selling them, we're getting them, we're offloading, we're losing money. And so you're starting to see the insurance company kind of take a look at itself and look in the mirror. But you said you want to talk about cost. All of those impact individually, and collectively they have a different impact. I believe that the biggest impact to healthcare, obviously, is the invention of specialty drugs and all this advancement in specialty drugs. High-cost drugs is driving the biggest expense item. I don't think anybody can argue that in healthcare. But second to that is really when we left a managed care environment, and I'm not talking about HMO.
Right.
I'm talking we went to open access networks from a rebound effect of people rejecting HMOs back in the 90s, people other than Kaiser not wanting to be in an integrated model. But there are proven models that if you condense or focus your network, even in a tiered structure or a complete structure, that you can affect cost. It's a unit cost conversation. Math. You just lower the cost. You're going to lower the amount you pay. And I think that's the first thing that people can start to understand is, this is why I tell employers, you have the ability to affect healthcare more than anybody else because you're the customer, you're the consumer, you're the buyer.
Yep.
Do you agree with that? And talk to me if you do.
No, they're 100% the buyer. It's funny, as you're describing what's going on with the exchange product, the marketplace, I was going to turn around and ask you because you know the answer. It's like, and whose feet is all of that additional cost pressure going to fall at? It's not going to fall at the governments and Medicare and Medicaid. It's not going to fall at the individual exchange products.
Right.
It's going to fall to the employers.
That's right.
So all the problems we've been talking about, there's just
and the providers. They're going to go after the providers too.
Yeah, that's true. And just pile on to say we can call the employers whatever we want in this. They are the purchasers of healthcare. Yeah, they are. They are the ones that are fitting the bill for this, and all those additional pressures just mean that balloon is going to squeeze a little bit more towards them. And we're right back to now how do you shrink the pie when the balloon's getting squeezed your way?
So here's what I'm a big believer of, and this is why it's been a great conversation. I think we'll tackle one more topic, and been a great session. I'm a big proponent that I believe I don't have the solution for healthcare, but I have a solution that I think can affect healthcare.
Okay.
And I really believe it is partnering providers and employers to solve the problem together, right? And you and I can have a role in that, but when they're conversing and they're talking to one another, they get to actually talk about their unique challenges and how they can solve for one another. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, this is how confident should everybody be in their position in the delivery chain? Because guess what? There are worlds where brokers and consultants do not need to be in that conversation. There are worlds where PPOs don't need to be in that conversation, or PBMs. The only people that are necessary for this is the person getting the care and the provider delivering the care. Everybody else needs to look in the mirror, to look to your left, look to your right. Who is essential to this? Care delivery and the person getting care. The rest of us better be able to justify our position in this food chain, all right, or in this delivery chain, I should say. So when studies have indicated that there's 35% waste in healthcare, it's not between the PCP and the member getting their physical. That's the essential care right there. It's not even in the surgeon delivering or those kinds of things, as long as the right protocols are in place. Everybody else, you and me both, need to make sure that we are delivering value in that system today. And let's go back to, if we expect our employers to have a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan, we're in the same boat. What are you delivering today? How can you continue to deliver that or more in 3 years? And how can you do the same in 5, 10, and beyond? Because the one way to shrink the pie is to get anybody who's not the provider and the person getting the care out of the way.
I agree. I think there's hope for healthcare. I'm not as pessimistic as I was when you were with me. I'm not as pessimistic on the consulting side. I've kind of broadened my understanding through some relationships with you and others around the challenges they face. I want to wrap and give you the last word. Tell the audience if there's anything you'd like to say around healthcare, things that they ought to be thinking of. One last thought you want to leave them with. The floor is yours.
I would just say, this kind of having the discussion, we can't be afraid of not having the discussion, right? We've got to be able to, just that last part of that honest conversation, or you look at me and me look at you and say, are you essential in this chain or not? Because if we don't figure out a way to remove some of that middle of this delivery chain, then we're all going to find ourselves in a scenario where it's genuinely unaffordable, right? It genuinely is unsustainable. And something has to happen, like a government stepping in and saying, we're going to do this entirely differently. So in that sense, I guess my last word is the providers, the vendors, the brokers, all of us need to make sure that we're working together to create solutions. And the employers are the ones who get to say if we're doing it the right way or not. So we can either work together or we're going to find ourselves working very, very separately. And I don't know that that's the best solution for ourselves, our clients, and certainly not for the members and patients.
Well, it's been a great first session, Mark. We had no real fights and arguments, so we'll have to have another one just to get into it and show the audience that we do bicker. Been very productive from my side. I hope the audience has really appreciated this discussion. I hope it was thoughtful, insightful, and we'll be bringing episode 2 to you shortly. Thanks for being here.